The clang of metal doors echoes through the dimly lit corridor. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, rust, and something more insidious, violence waiting to erupt. Inmates press against the bars of their cells, eyes filled with malice and curiosity as they watch the new arrival. Some whisper, others laugh, but all of them recognize fresh meat when they see it. Nathan Cross walks forward, his steps steady, his face impassive. He doesn't react to the jeers, the threats, or the slamming fists against iron bars. His piercing blue eyes scan the surroundings, absorbing every detail, every potential threat. He has been in worse places before, war zones, enemy strongholds, but this is different. This is a battlefield where he stands alone. At 42, Nathan is a man built for war, tall, muscular, every movement precise and controlled. Once a decorated Delta Force commander, he lived by a code: serve, protect, eliminate threats. Now, that same country has discarded him, branding him a traitor for a crime he didn't commit. He was framed, thrown into this hellhole with no allies, no backup. Just him against a prison full of men who want to break him. And they will try. The guards shove him forward. Ahead, he spots a group of inmates watching him with amused smirks. "Welcome to Blackridge," one of them sneers. "Hope you like pain." Nathan doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. Because what these men don't know is that the prison they control is about to become their own personal nightmare. The prison gates slammed shut behind Nathan Cross with a finality that echoed in his chest. The world outside was gone, replaced by the concrete jungle of Blackridge Penitentiary, a place where weakness was preyed upon, and only the strong survived. The guards didn't bother with formalities. They processed him like an animal, handing him an orange jumpsuit and a number that stripped him of his identity. Inmate 47289, as if that meant anything to him. The walk to his cell block was a slow march through hostility. Inmates leaned against the railings, their voices a cacophony of taunts and threats. "Fresh meat. Bet he won't last a week. Hey, soldier boy, you scared?" Nathan ignored them. Fear wasn't an emotion he entertained. His focus remained on his surroundings, the blind spots, the makeshift weapons hidden in plain sight, the men who watched him like predators circling their next kill. Then he saw them. A group of men stood by the far end of the corridor, radiating authority. They weren't just inmates. They were rulers of this kingdom of violence. At the center was Luther the Butcher Kane, a mountain of a man with cold, dead eyes. His presence alone commanded obedience. To his right stood his enforcer, Kane, a wiry but lethal second-in-command known for his love of breaking bones. Nathan had seen their type before. Gang leaders, power-hungry animals who thrived on fear. As Nathan passed, Luther grinned. "I've heard about you, Cross." His voice was like gravel scraping against steel. "You think you're special? Just another lost soul in my kingdom." Nathan didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge him. He just kept walking. That was enough to make the gang members bristle. "Yo, you deaf soldier," Kane sneered. "Maybe we should teach you how things work around here." Nathan stopped. He turned his head just slightly, just enough to meet Kane's gaze. A second of silence stretched into eternity. Kane's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but Nathan caught it. He had seen men like Kane before, bullies who thrived on intimidation. Nathan wasn't impressed. Without a word, he resumed walking. For now. His cell was a claustrophobic box. Hard mattress, metal toilet, graffiti-covered walls filled with crude messages and warnings. As the door slid shut behind him, he exhaled slowly, centering himself. A voice broke the silence. "You've already made enemies." Nathan turned. His cellmate, an older man, sat on the lower bunk, arms crossed, eyes sharp with experience. He had the look of someone who had been in Blackridge for far too long. Graying beard, weathered skin, but a presence that demanded respect. "Name's Luis Mendez," the old man said, nodding. "They call me Old Man." Nathan studied him for a moment. Not a threat. Not yet. "Nathan," Mendez smirked. "I know who you are. A soldier. Delta Force, right?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not gonna mean shit in here." Nathan remained silent. He didn't need a lecture. Mendez sighed. "Listen, I've been in this hellhole for 20 years. I've seen men like you before. Strong, disciplined. But strength doesn't keep you alive in Blackridge. Knowing how to pick your fights does." Nathan finally spoke. "And what do you suggest?" The old man studied him for a moment before answering. "For now, watch your back. The sons of hell run this place and you just pissed them off." Nathan leaned against the cold metal frame of his bunk. He had no intention of bending to men like Luther and Kane. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to fight back, and the war had just begun. The prison operated on a brutal rhythm. Survive the night. Endure the day. Repeat. Nathan had barely settled into the routine when the first challenge came. The cafeteria. It was a battlefield in its own right. Long metal tables arranged in rows, inmates divided by invisible lines of power. The Sons of Hell dominated the far end, a wall of muscle and tattoos, their red insignia etched onto their skin like a badge of honor. Others sat in smaller groups, gangs, loners, alliances forged out of necessity rather than friendship. Nathan grabbed his tray, moving through the line without a word. Eyes followed him. Whispers spread. The man who ignored Luther, the soldier who didn't show fear. As he searched for a seat, a figure stepped in front of him, blocking his way. Kane. A cruel smirk spread across his face. "You walk around here like you're untouchable, soldier boy. That's a mistake." His voice was laced with amusement, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Nathan didn't respond. He had no interest in playing power games. Kane's smirk widened. "No words? That's smart. I'd hate to have to break that pretty face before lunch." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "But you need to understand something. This ain't the army. You don't follow orders here. You kneel." Nathan met his gaze, unflinching. "You talk too much." For a second, the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. The challenge hung in the air. Then, a laugh. Kane chuckled, stepping back. "All right, tough guy, I like you. You've got spirit." He slapped Nathan's tray, spilling its contents onto the floor. "But you're still nothing." The room tensed, waiting for a reaction. Nathan exhaled slowly. He knew the rules of engagement. Fighting now meant playing into their hands. He picked up the tray, unfazed, and walked to an empty seat. Some inmates whispered, others nodded in silent approval. He hadn't submitted, but he hadn't taken the bait either. Kane watched him for a moment longer before turning back to his gang, grinning. "Dead man walking," he muttered. Nathan didn't need to hear it to know it was true. That night, Mendez leaned against the cell wall, arms crossed. "You made the right call." Nathan sat on his bunk, sharpening the edge of a plastic spoon, a habit more than a necessity. "They were testing me," Mendez nodded. "And they'll keep testing you until you break. Or until you break them." Nathan smirked. "That's the plan." Mendez chuckled, shaking his head. "You remind me of someone I used to know, tough, disciplined. Thought he could take on the whole system." His expression darkened slightly. "He's dead now." Nathan glanced at him. "Because of the Sons of Hell?" Mendez nodded. "They own this place. Drugs, guards, fights, you name it. And Luther? He's just the face of the beast. The real power? That's higher up." Nathan caught the meaning in his words. "The Warden." Mendez hesitated before sighing. "Warden Donovan plays his own game. He lets Luther run Black Ridge, but only because it benefits him. Nobody crosses him and walks away unscathed." Nathan leaned back against the cold wall, processing the information. The Sons of Hell weren't just a gang. They were part of something bigger, something rotten. He exhaled. It didn't matter whether it was Luther, Kane, or Donovan himself. He was coming for all of them. And they had no idea. Nathan had expected it. The first real move, the ambush. It came 3 nights after the cafeteria encounter. The showers were the perfect hunting ground. No cameras, no guards paying attention, just concrete walls and steam thick enough to hide a murder. Nathan knew it the second he stepped inside. The silence was wrong. He turned on the faucet, letting the water run over his skin. He didn't have to wait long. A shadow moved behind him, another to his left, a third blocking the exit. 3 men, Sons of Hell. Nathan didn't react. Not yet. One of them, a stocky man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned. "Kane sends his regards." Nathan caught the first attack in the reflection of the wet tile. A shank, crude but deadly, aimed for his ribs. He twisted, grabbing the attacker's wrist, and in one smooth motion, he dislocated the man's arm with a sickening pop. A scream echoed through the showers. 1 down. The second man lunged. A wild swing meant to knock Nathan off balance. Nathan ducked low, driving an elbow into his gut. The man staggered back, gasping for air. 2 down. Scarface, the last one standing, hesitated. He had a choice, run or fight. He chose wrong. He rushed forward, swinging the shank wildly. Nathan sidestepped, caught his wrist, and slammed his head against the wall. Blood sprayed against the tile as the man collapsed. 3 down. Nathan exhaled slowly, fast, efficient. No wasted movement. But this wasn't a victory. This was just a warning. Footsteps approached. Mendez. The old man took one look at the bodies groaning on the floor and sighed. Told you this was coming. Nathan grabbed a towel, wiping the water from his face. It's just starting. Mendez glanced at the unconscious men. Luther won't like this. Nathan's eyes were cold. Good. Because now it was his turn to send a message. The air in Black Ridge was different now. The ambush had failed. The inmates whispered about it. Some watched Nathan with new respect, others with fear. Luther hadn't retaliated yet, but it was coming. Nathan didn't care. He was used to war. But that night as he lay on his bunk, sleep didn't come easily. Instead, his mind drifted, back to the world before prison, back to the moment everything changed. 2 years ago, Afghanistan. The desert night was cold. Nathan crouched in the shadows of an abandoned building, his team spread out in a tactical formation. Delta Force, ghosts in the dark. Their mission was simple: extract an informant with intel on an upcoming terrorist attack, but something was off. His comms buzzed. Something's wrong, his second-in-command Dawson muttered. This place is too quiet. Nathan signaled his team forward, their weapons ready. Step by step they moved toward the target building. Then, boom, the explosion ripped through the night. An IED. Nathan was thrown back, ears ringing. He hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. Through the haze he saw his men down. Some weren't moving. Gunfire erupted. An ambush. Nathan's instincts kicked in. Get up, return fire, take control. But as he fought, one thought kept gnawing at him. Someone set them up. By the time reinforcements arrived, half his team was dead. The informant, gone. And then came the worst part, the betrayal. Nathan sat in the debriefing room days later, battered but alive. His superiors were waiting, cold, detached. You're being charged with treason, one of them said. You leaked mission details to the enemy. Nathan's blood ran cold. That's a lie. They slid a folder across the table. Inside, manufactured evidence, bank transactions, false reports, enough to destroy him. Someone needed a scapegoat, they told him. And you're it. Present, Black Ridge Prison. Nathan's eyes snapped open. His hands were clenched into fists. The memory never left him. The faces of his fallen team haunted him. He was framed, betrayed by his own government. And now he was here. A slow clap echoed in the darkness. Nathan turned his head. Luther. The gang leader stood outside his cell, leaning against the bars, grinning like a predator studying its prey. You're full of surprises, soldier boy. His voice was thick with amusement. I figured you'd be dead by now. Nathan didn't respond. Luther chuckled. You think what you did in the showers makes you untouchable? You don't get it. He tapped the metal bars. This is my world. You're just a visitor. Nathan sat up slowly, his piercing gaze locking onto the gang leader. Then I guess you should be worried. For the first time, Luther's grin faltered. The war was coming. And Nathan Cross wasn't going to lose. Nathan wasn't looking for friends. Friends got you killed, but alliances, those were necessary. The day after Luther's visit, the tension in Black Ridge thickened. Nathan wasn't just a target anymore. He was a threat. The cafeteria was quieter when he walked in. Fewer jeers, fewer eyes lingering too long. The weak knew better than to get involved, and the strong were waiting to see his next move. Nathan grabbed his tray, scanning the room. Where you sat mattered. A figure waved him over. Malik, a younger inmate, barely in his 20s. Skinny, cautious, but not afraid. Nathan had noticed him before. Quiet, observant. Someone trying to survive without picking sides. Nathan sat across from him. That was some move in the showers, Malik said, keeping his voice low. Nathan didn't respond, taking a bite of his food. He didn't trust anyone. Malik smirked. Word is, Luther's pissed. And Kane? He's coming for you soon. Nathan finally looked at him. And you care because... Malik shrugged. Because I don't like those bastards either, and because I know things. Things you might need. Nathan studied him. There was something about Malik. He wasn't just some scared kid, he had an angle. Go on. Malik leaned in slightly. The sons of hell, they run everything inside these walls. But outside, they've got ties with the guards, even the warden. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mendez had hinted at this, but now it was confirmed. Malik continued. Drugs, weapons, information, it all moves because Warden Donovan lets it. Luther's just the front, the real power is higher up. Nathan exhaled. Now it made sense. Why the gang acted untouchable, why the guards turned a blind eye. You want to take them down? Malik asked. Nathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Malik nodded, understanding. Then you'll need help. And I can help. Nathan leaned forward slightly. Why should I trust you? Malik's expression darkened. Because they killed my brother. Silence. Nathan saw it then, the real fire in Malik's eyes. This wasn't just survival for him. This was personal. An alliance was forming. But alliances in Blackridge? They always came with a cost. Nathan didn't waste time. If he was going to take down the Sons of Hell, he needed leverage. And leverage came from the desperate and the angry. The Yard. It was the heart of Blackridge, the place where alliances were made or broken. Nathan sat on the worn-out bench, eyes scanning the crowd. There were others like Malik, inmates who hated the Sons of Hell but had no power to fight back. Nathan was about to change that. A group of men leaned against the far wall watching him. Not gang members, not weaklings either. They were outcasts, the ones who had lost friends, lost turf, lost everything to Luther's gang. Nathan stood and walked toward them. You're making a mistake, Mendez muttered from his spot nearby. Nathan ignored him. This was necessary. He stopped in front of the group. They didn't flinch. That was a good sign. I know what you want, Nathan said. One of them, a heavy-set man with sharp eyes, crossed his arms. That right? Nathan nodded. You want Luther and Kane gone. You want to take back control. The man scoffed. And you think you're the guy to do it? Nathan stepped closer. I don't think, I know. Silence. He let the weight of his words settle in. Then a smirk. The man, Rodriguez, finally nodded. All right, soldier, I'm listening. That night, Mendez sat on his bunk watching Nathan with weary eyes. You're stirring the pot, Cross. Nathan was sharpening a piece of plastic into something deadlier. It was already boiling. Mendez sighed. You don't get it. You think this is a war? It's not. It's a system. You break Luther, someone else takes his place. You break Donovan, another corrupt bastard moves in. This place doesn't change. Nathan met his gaze. It will. Mendez stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You really believe that? Nathan didn't answer. He just kept sharpening his weapon. Because he didn't believe, he knew. Nathan knew the time for silence was over. The first shot had to be his. The Sons of Hell controlled Blackridge, but their power wasn't absolute. It was built on fear, on the belief that no one could challenge them. Nathan was about to shatter that belief. The plan. Malik had given him the names, inmates who wanted Luther gone. Rodriguez and his crew had numbers, but they needed something more, a leader, someone who wouldn't just fight, but win. Nathan gathered them in the laundry room, one of the few places without heavy gang presence. We do this right? We break them before they even see it coming. Rodriguez frowned. You got a plan, soldier? Nathan nodded. We take their power piece by piece, cut their drug supply, break their runners, show the other inmates they aren't invincible. Rodriguez smirked. And when Luther retaliates, Nathan's eyes were cold. Then we finish this, the first strike. They moved that night. Nathan, Malik, and two others intercepted one of Luther's couriers in the storage area, a weasel of a man named Trevor. The guy barely saw them coming before Nathan slammed him against the wall, forearm pressing hard against his throat. You're done running for them, Nathan said. You don't move their product. You don't deliver their messages. You disappear. Trevor's eyes were wide with terror. Luther will kill me. Nathan leaned in. Not if I kill him first. The message was clear. The gang wasn't untouchable anymore. By morning, Luther knew. Retaliation. Nathan expected Kane to come fast and hard. He didn't expect Warden Donovan. The cell doors clanged open at dawn. Guards stormed in, yanking Nathan out of bed. Mendez barely had time to react before they dragged Nathan into the hallway. No words, no explanations. They brought him to Donovan's office. The warden sat behind his polished desk, staring at Nathan with cold amusement. A predator assessing his prey. You've been busy, Cross. Nathan remained silent. Donovan chuckled. I don't care what grudges you have against Luther and his boys, but here's the problem. You're disrupting my business. Nathan's jaw clenched. So it was true. The warden was in on everything. Donovan leaned forward. "I run Blackridge, not you, not Luther. If you don't back off, I'll make sure you disappear." Nathan met his gaze. "You could try." For the first time, Donovan's smile faded. A long silence stretched between them. Then Donovan smirked again. "You're bold, I respect that, but let me show you what happens to bold men in my prison." He nodded to the guards. They dragged Nathan out, straight to solitary. The war had truly begun. Nathan sat in the darkness, muscles tensed. This wasn't a loss. This was proof. Luther feared him. Donovan feared him. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reacted so fast. They thought a few days in the hole would break him. They had no idea. This was only the beginning. Nathan had endured worse than solitary confinement. He had been locked in pitch-black rooms overseas, starved, beaten, tested beyond human limits. 3 days in a concrete box. That was nothing, but that didn't mean he didn't feel it. The silence, the isolation, the waiting. Nathan counted the seconds, the hours, waiting for the next move. It came on the 4th day. The door swung open, blinding him with sudden light. A guard pulled him out, shoving him forward. Nathan didn't resist. Not yet. As they marched him back, he expected to see Mendez, Malik, maybe even Rodriguez. Instead, Kane was waiting. Nathan's fists clenched. So this was it. The trap. "Welcome back, soldier," Kane sneered. "Hope you enjoyed your vacation." Nathan stayed silent, observing, calculating. They weren't killing him yet. That meant Donovan still wanted him alive. Kane chuckled. "Oh, don't worry. You'll get your fight soon enough, but first..." They led him somewhere unexpected. The betrayal. The rec yard. A crowd had gathered. Something was happening. And then Nathan saw him. Mendez. The old man stood near Luther, looking exhausted, beaten down, but alive. Nathan's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Luther grinned. "You didn't see this coming, did you?" Nathan's eyes locked onto Mendez. The man wouldn't meet his gaze, and then the words came, "It's over, Cross." A slow, suffocating silence settled in. Mendez exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "How stirred up too much, kid? You got too close to something bigger than just Luther. So I cut a deal." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. "No, not Mendez." Luther laughed. "Your old friend here came to us. Said he'd give you up. Said he just wanted to survive." Nathan's breathing slowed. His vision narrowed. This was a setup, a message, a warning. But Mendez, he had been the one person Nathan trusted. Now he was the reason Nathan was about to die. The attack. Kane struck first. Nathan saw it coming, a blade low and fast. He dodged, twisting, but they were ready for him. 3 men, 4, a coordinated assault. Nathan fought like an animal, blocking, countering, striking. One attacker down, another clutching his broken arm, but there were too many. A punch to the ribs, a kick to the knee. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't stop. Then Luther stepped in. A fist like a sledgehammer slammed into Nathan's jaw. His vision blurred. Then the world tilted. He hit the ground hard. The taste of blood filled his mouth. More kicks, more pain. The voices blurred. The world spun. And then, darkness. The aftermath. When Nathan woke, he was in his cell. Alive. Barely. His body ached. Every breath hurt. Malik sat nearby, looking tense. "They almost killed you." Nathan swallowed the blood in his mouth. "They should have." Malik's face darkened. "They didn't want to. Donovan wants to make an example of you first." Nathan exhaled slowly. He wasn't done yet. His body was broken. His trust shattered. But something else burned in him now. Rage. They thought they had won. They were wrong. Pain was temporary. Failure wasn't an option. Nathan lay on his bunk, every breath a sharp reminder of the beating he had taken. His ribs felt cracked. His lip was swollen. But his mind was clear. They thought he was done. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The plan. Malik sat across from him, watching cautiously. "You need time to heal." Nathan ignored him, sitting up slowly. "No time." Malik shook his head. "Luther is celebrating. He thinks you're dead weight now. But Donovan, he's got something worse planned." Nathan met his gaze. "Then we don't wait." Rodriguez had already spread the word. Luther's gang was vulnerable. With Nathan out of the way, they had gotten comfortable. That was their mistake. Nathan clenched his fist. "We take them out now, before Donovan can react." Malik hesitated. "Are you sure?" You're not even... Nathan stood, ignoring the pain. I'm ready. The ambush they struck during yard time. Luther sat at his usual spot, flanked by Cain and 3 more sons of hell, laughing, relaxed, untouchable. Until Nathan walked through the gates. The yard went silent. Everyone expected him to be dead. Luther's smirk faded. Cain stood immediately. You don't know when to quit, do you? Nathan wiped blood from his lip and cracked his knuckles. I don't quit. I finish things. Luther chuckled, standing. You're a stubborn son of a bitch, Cross. He rolled his shoulders. Fine. Let's end this. The fight Luther was big, strong, fast for his size, but Nathan was trained. The first punch came hard. Nathan barely dodged. He countered with a strike to Luther's ribs, a calculated hit to a weak spot. Luther grunted, but barely reacted. He was a tank. Another swing, this time Nathan couldn't avoid it. A fist slammed into his shoulder, sending him back. Cain moved forward to jump in, but Rodriguez and Malik blocked him. This was Nathan's fight. Luther grinned. You don't have the strength for this. Nathan spit blood onto the concrete. I don't need strength. I need precision. He struck again, a brutal elbow to Luther's throat, a knee to the gut. Luther stumbled. For the first time, he looked unsure. Nathan didn't let him recover. A final blow, a devastating strike to the jaw. Luther crumpled. Silence. Nathan stood over him, chest heaving. The king had fallen, but the battle wasn't over. Because now Donovan would make his move. Luther was down. His body sprawled across the concrete, chest rising and falling in ragged, uneven breaths. The king of Blackridge had fallen. Nathan didn't move. He stood over the defeated gang leader, his knuckles raw and bleeding, his breath controlled but heavy. The yard was silent. Around them, inmates gathered in stunned disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. The sons of hell had ruled Blackridge for years. No one challenged them, not without paying the price, but Nathan Cross had just rewritten the rules. Rodriguez and Malik stood off to the side, their bodies tense, their eyes darting around. They knew what came next. Nathan knew too. He had won the fight, but the war? That was still undecided. Then, as if on cue, the blaring sirens cut through the silence. The wardens move. The tension in the yard snapped as the guards swarmed in. Nathan remained still as the black-clad officers poured in through the gates. Too many, too fast. More than a normal response to a fight. This was planned. Malik shifted beside him. They're coming for you. Nathan barely nodded. He had expected retaliation from Luther's men. What he hadn't expected was this kind of force. Then he saw him. Warden Donovan stepped through the crowd of officers, his crisp uniform spotless, his expression smug, the look of a man who had already won. Nathan clenched his fists. This had never been about Luther. Luther was just a pawn, a distraction. The real power had always been the warden. Donovan's gaze swept over the chaos, taking it all in before finally settling on Nathan. Impressive, Cross, he called out. I didn't think you had it in you. Nathan said nothing. He was too busy calculating. His pulse was steady, his mind sharp. There was a way out of this. He just had to find it. Donovan exhaled in mock disappointment. And here I thought you'd last longer, but you got too ambitious. You should have stayed in your place. Nathan still didn't respond. He was listening, watching. Because Donovan was making a mistake. He was talking too much. The warden took a few slow steps forward. You thought you were breaking the system, but all you did was save me the trouble of cleaning house. Luther was useful, but he was getting sloppy. Now that he's out of the picture, I can run things properly. Nathan's jaw clenched. He had played right into Donovan's hands. This had never been about law and order. Blackridge wasn't a prison, it was a business. And Donovan, he was the CEO. Nathan took a slow breath. He had one move left, one last chance to flip the game. He had to act now. The trap closes. Donovan snapped his fingers. The guards closed in. Rodriguez cursed. We have to move, now. Nathan stood his ground. The guards rushed forward, batons raised. Rodriguez and Malik fought back, but they were outnumbered. Nathan swung hard, knocking one officer to the ground before another cracked a baton across his back. Pain exploded through his ribs. He stumbled but caught himself. A third guard aimed low. Nathan twisted, grabbed his wrist and sent him crashing to the ground. But it wasn't enough. A fourth blow came, hard, fast. His vision blurred as a baton connected with his skull. His knees buckled. The world tilted sideways. As he hit the concrete, the last thing he saw was Donovan's smirk. Waking in the dark, Nathan woke up somewhere new, not solitary, not the infirmary. The room was small, sterile, and too clean, and across from him, sitting behind a thick glass partition, was Donovan. The warden smirked, sipping from a porcelain coffee cup like this was nothing more than a business meeting. "You're awake. Good." Nathan sat up slowly, ignoring the throbbing in his skull. He wasn't dead. That meant Donovan still needed something. "You had potential, Cross," Donovan continued. "I almost considered offering you a position. You could have thrived here. But instead you chose the losing side." Nathan met his gaze, saying nothing. Let him talk, let him feel in control. Donovan sighed dramatically. Luther was an idiot. He thought brute force was enough. "But you?" He chuckled. "You actually tried to be a hero." He leaned forward. "Here's the truth. Blackridge isn't a prison, it's a machine. A system that keeps men like me rich and men like you buried." Nathan exhaled, his body tense. Donovan tilted his head. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" Nathan finally spoke. "And yet, you're still talking." For the first time, Donovan's smirk faltered. And then, the alarms blared. The tables turned. Donovan shot up from his seat. "What the hell?" The intercom crackled. "Riot in progress. Multiple areas compromised." Nathan smiled. "You thought I was fighting alone?" Because before Donovan had thrown him into solitary, Nathan had already set things in motion. Rodriguez, Malik, the outcasts. They weren't just fighting the sons of hell anymore. They were fighting the prison itself. And Nathan had made sure the right people were watching. The door behind Donovan burst open. Armed men. Federal agents, the real law. One of them stepped forward. "Warden Donovan, you're under arrest." Donovan turned, his face pale. "What? This is a mistake." The agent didn't blink. "We have enough evidence of corruption, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. You're done." Nathan stood slowly, stretching his sore muscles. "Like you said, Donovan, it's easy to erase a man." The endgame Nathan was escorted out of Blackridge not in chains, but as a free man. His record? Cleared. His name? Restored. Rodriguez and Malik? They had a chance now. Nathan had given them one final piece of advice. Survive. And don't let them rebuild the system we just burned down. Malik had nodded, determined, ready. Nathan knew he wouldn't see them again, but their fight wasn't over. Neither was his. The men who had framed him were still out there. And now it was their turn to run. Nathan stood at the gates of Blackridge, his body aching but his mind sharp. The prison that had nearly broken him now stood behind him, its walls holding the corruption and chaos he had left in his wake. The federal agents had done their part, dismantling Donovan's empire piece by piece, but Nathan knew better than to believe it was over. Justice wasn't something handed down. It was something taken. As the final paperwork was processed, a familiar voice called his name. Nathan turned to see Agent Sarah Donovan. Not a coincidence. She stood with her hands on her hips, sunglasses hiding her eyes. A professional. No wasted words. Nathan had only met her once years ago when he was still a soldier. She had been one of the few agents who believed in him. She nodded toward the van carrying her disgraced cousin, Warden Donovan, into custody. "You did it." Nathan exhaled. "Not yet." Sarah studied him. She understood what he meant. Nathan had fought his way out of Blackridge, but the people who had framed him, the ones who had taken his life away, they were still out there, and he was coming for them. The road to revenge. Nathan walked out of Blackridge with nothing but his instincts and a list of names burned into his memory. Men in suits, high-ranking officials, people who had orchestrated his downfall from behind desks. They thought they had buried him in Blackridge. They were wrong. His first stop was a rundown motel outside of town, cash only. No questions asked. He needed to disappear before he could strike. Nathan stared into the cracked mirror, assessing himself. Bruises, scars, eyes that had seen too much. He had been framed, beaten, locked away, and yet he was still here. Now he had the advantage. They didn't know he was coming. One last goodbye. Before he vanished, Nathan had one last stop, a graveyard. The names on the headstones were familiar. His team, the men he had fought alongside, the men he had failed. He crouched beside Dawson's grave, his second in command. I don't know who pulled the trigger that night, but I will. Nathan had promised himself that his revenge wouldn't just be about clearing his name. It would be about justice for them, too. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hunt begins. Nathan boarded a bus heading west, away from the chaos. For now, he was a ghost. But soon, the real fight would start. The people who thought they had won were about to learn a hard truth. Nathan Cross was still alive, and he was coming for them. The heavy gates of Blackridge Penitentiary slid open, groaning under the weight of rust and time. Nathan Cross stepped forward, his boots meeting solid ground that wasn't prison concrete for the first time in years. The air smelled different out here, less of sweat and blood, more of freedom. But Nathan knew better than to savor it, because this wasn't over. The sky above was a dull gray, the world outside as indifferent as the one he had left behind. He wasn't stepping into peace. He was stepping into war, a world that moved on, without him. Nathan took slow, measured steps toward the waiting transport. A federal agent stood near the vehicle, arms crossed, waiting. Sarah Donovan. She was the one responsible for bringing down her cousin, Warden Donovan. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Nathan stopped in front of her. Neither spoke at first. She was the first to break the silence. I imagine you have questions. Nathan tilted his head. Just one. Sarah nodded, already knowing what he was going to ask. Who was behind it all? The betrayal? The false charges? The mission that went wrong? It wasn't just one man. Donovan was part of it, but he wasn't the mastermind. Nathan had spent years rotting in a cage because someone had needed him out of the way. Someone higher up, someone powerful. Sarah exhaled, pulling out a folder and handing it to him. This is everything we have so far. You were set up, Nathan. And the people who did it, they're still out there. Nathan took the folder but didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he met her gaze. Then my job isn't done. A prison left in flames. Nathan turned back, taking one last look at Blackridge, the place that had tried to break him, the place that had almost won. But now it was a wreck. With Warden Donovan exposed, the entire system was collapsing. The corruption that had let the sons of hell rule, that had allowed innocent men to be thrown away like trash, was being uprooted. But it wasn't justice. Nathan knew how the world worked. New monsters would take the place of the old ones. Rodriguez and Malik were still inside. They had helped him tear the system down. Now they had to survive what came next. Nathan clenched his fists. He wished them luck. They would need it. Ghosts of the past. Nathan walked away from the prison, but it didn't feel like he was leaving anything behind. Because the past followed him. The betrayal, the faces of the men who had died under his command, the gunfire, the explosion. He could still hear Dawson's voice in his head. It's a trap, Nate. Pull back. Nathan had ignored the warning, and because of that, half his team had been slaughtered, framed for their deaths, branded a traitor. Nathan tightened his grip on the folder in his hands. He had spent enough time looking back. Now he was going to look forward. A man without a home. The drive out of Blackridge was silent. Sarah drove, her eyes occasionally flicking toward him, assessing. Nathan didn't speak. He just watched the world blur past the window. He had no home to go back to. His house? Gone. His bank accounts? Frozen. His name? Cleared, but tainted. The world had moved on without him. Nathan had spent a lifetime following orders. Now he had none, but he had a purpose. And that was more dangerous than anything. The list. They pulled up to a motel just outside the city, a place where no one would ask questions. Nathan stepped out, glancing at Sarah one last time. She hesitated, then handed him a burner phone. You don't have to do this alone. Nathan smirked. I always have. Sarah shook her head. These people? They're not like Luther. They have real power. If you go after them, you won't just be an ex-con looking for justice. You'll be a dead man. Nathan met her gaze. Then they should have killed me when they had the chance. She sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she turned the key in the ignition. Be careful, Cross. Nathan watched as the car disappeared down the road. Then finally he opened the folder. Inside, names, faces, locations. The people who had framed him, the people who had stolen his life. Nathan pulled a pen from his pocket and started crossing off names, one by one. The first target. The first name on the list was Colonel Victor Langley. Nathan knew the name well. Langley had been his commanding officer during the mission that had gone wrong, the one who had sold him out. He was retired now, comfortable. Living in a high-security estate just outside of DC, Nathan smirked, not for long. He tossed the burner phone onto the nightstand and grabbed his duffel bag. Inside, a new identity, a passport, cash, a weapon. It had been years since he was a free man, but now he was hunting. A shadow in the dark. The first rule of war: control the battlefield. Nathan spent 2 days watching Langley's house. The cameras, the guards, the security patterns. It was almost too easy. Langley thought he was untouchable. That was his first mistake. Nathan moved at midnight, silent, invisible, a ghost. Within minutes, he was inside. Langley was asleep, peaceful, oblivious. Nathan stood over him, watching the man who had destroyed his life sleep soundly, unaware that his reckoning had arrived. For a moment, Nathan considered just pulling the trigger, but no, that would be too easy. Langley needed to know why. He clamped a hand over Langley's mouth as the man jolted awake, eyes wide, panic setting in. Nathan leaned in, voice cold. "You remember me?" Langley's breathing was rapid, terror in his eyes. Nathan pressed the barrel of the gun against his temple. "Let's talk, because this was just the beginning. The hunt has begun." Nathan wasn't the same man who had entered Blackridge. The system had tried to bury him, erase him. Now he was free, and the people who had set him up, they weren't safe anymore. Because Nathan Cross was no longer just a soldier, he was a man with nothing to lose, and that made him the most dangerous man in the world.